Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support self-sufficiency. We also look to develop leaders that are moral and ethical in a world that is spinning out of control. Tune in to be part of the conversation shaping the future of our communities.
Well, hello again and welcome everyone. We're so glad to have Shannon Watson here with Majority. I know the website's Majority Middle. Is it Majority in the Middle?
Majority in the middle. Yes.
Yes. Sounds
Yes.
very interesting and fun to talk about. So I'll let her introduce herself and her organization and we'll just jump right in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, majority in the middle. We're majority middle because majorityinthemiddle.com was taken when we started the organization. And I do like I hover over it every once in a while. I go in and check like is it still taken?
Yes.
I don't want to get in a bidding war with somebody, make them think it's valuable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if they forget to re-register it, like I'm all over that. So
Yeah.
yes, Majority in the Middle is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. It's a 501(c)(3) for people who pay attention to those kind of things.
Mhm.
And we are sort of in a nutshell trying to bring civility back to political and civic conversation and get more people engaged because we have a theory that one of the reasons that we seem so divided, I mean, we are divided, but one of the reasons we seem so divided is because a lot of people in the middle have kind of dropped out of the conversation, of participation, and that just leaves the people on sort of the far ends being all the noise.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would slightly disagree on one thing, and I think, and maybe it's just my naivety, is that the word I'm looking?
Naivete?
Yeah, naivete, thank you.
Yes.
Is I have found that when I engage with people and have conversations, we're not as divided as as
Right.
I think. And I'm going to go back. I like history. I'm a fond lover of
Mm-hmm.
history, and I go back and I find that politics has always been a blood sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's very,
Absolutely.
very divisive. And I'm a fond lover of all of our, founding fathers, and perfect, imperfect doesn't matter to me. I don't care. They were people and they did what they did. And I was reading some documents between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson,
Mm.
and whoa. Talk about
Yeah.
divisive rhetoric. Woo! There was some divisive rhetoric there. And
Yes, absolutely.
it was actually kind of reassuring to me. It's like, hey, they got through this. We can get through this.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I know about the media, and I've learned this on social media in particular, and I think social media has, in my opinion, has been one of the major things that inflames people, is that the media has always thrived on contention. That's what
Mm-hmm.
gets clicks, what we call clicks in our day. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
sold newspapers back in the day. And that was as every bit as true back in the day as
Right.
it is now.
Yeah. The first
So,
years of TV, there was the adage for TV news, if it bleeds, it leads.
yes.
So, yes. And, in fairness,
Hmm.
real journalism, and when I say journalism, I mean like
Yes.
credentialed, editorially controlled, fact-based, double checked, real quote unquote journalism has two biases that is just inherent. The first one is a bias towards conflict, and the second one is a bias towards fairness. And I think that's one of the ways that we get this sort of binary picture in our media of coverage of politics because they do want to acknowledge that there's usually two sides to a story. There's usually about 14 sides to a story, but there's at least two sides to a story. And they want to sort of give, be fair and elevate sort of this is this is what people say, and then this is what people disagree with. Um, so I think that's part of the challenge to political communication is when you do that, when you say, okay, well, there's this side or this side, it does give us that binary picture. But you do need conflict for a good story.
Yeah.
Which I will say, like we do a lot of work with media in trying to one of the ways we're trying to sort of change political culture is understanding that elected officials, and I do most of my work at the state and local level, very little with Congress and the presidential administration. That's like my 20-year plan. Like, let me see what works in these states first, and then figure out, how do we get that to DC? But are you familiar with the term gentle parenting?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I don't have any kids, but I had a friend of mine who is a political theorist, and I was explaining to her sort of how I deal with legislators, and she's like, "Oh, you gentle parent legislators." And what I do is, if they're doing the stuff that bugs me, I just ignore it. And if they're doing the things which the conduct that we want to see, elected officials behave in, but this is what we want them to do, then we try to elevate that. And part of that is working with media and pointing to the stories of people who are working together, instead of just the story about the conflict. Republicans are on this side, or Democrats are on that side, or this is a party line over here, and this is the party line over there. But really, like encouraging them, like do the story about the boring thing that people are working together. And I will say, it's it's not necessarily that it's rare, but it shows up in media so rarely that it is kind of newsy right now. So we do a lot of that. Like, I don't necessarily encourage a lot of stories about, me or the organization or whatever. I'm like, these are the people who are doing it right. These are the people who should be elevated. They do have to live in an attention economy. So like give them the credit, give them the attention for doing this the way 80 some percent of Americans want them to do it.
Yeah. And I, when I see stories or
Mhm.
whatever like that, I'm always intrigued. And
Yeah,
so it automatically catches my attention. And I have this group on Sunday nights that I do, and it's a real small group of us, and we just get together and talk. It started off as kind of a constitutional thing, but
cool.
you know how everything kind of morphs and stuff.
Absolutely.
And we were talking last night about, and I came back to my roots a little bit because, I'm just Constitution history kind of thing. I love that. And once again, it goes back to this debate. Thomas Jefferson was debating with James Madison over, do we need a new constitution every 17 years? You know,
Interesting.
yeah. And so in our little discussion, we got off on the topics of all of the new things that are out there that we don't feel like our current constitution, even because I believe our constitution is just a framework.
Hmm.
I don't believe it's anything that's, I mean, some people consider it such a sacred document that it should never be modified. And
Right.
I'm like, I never saw a founding father who believed that.
Hmm.
But on the
Hmm.
flip side, do we need to just throw it out? I'll throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. And I don't think that either. So I'm kind of in the middle. And this
Awesome.
discuss this discussion was really interesting. Okay, let's talk about AI. Let's talk
Right.
about digital currency. Let's talk about cloning. And cloning's been
Hmm.
around for quite some time.
Yeah.
Um, do these, where does the rights, oh, we were talking about sentient robots.
Oh, yeah.
Are they human? Do they have rights? Um,
That's a big question.
yeah, and
Yeah.
privacy rights. I mean, my husband and I both agree on this. If I'm as a consumer, I think it was great to be in Europe because they have tremendous privacy laws, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But if you're a company trying to build a company, they can't compete with our companies because our companies don't have to adhere to all those privacy laws. They can sell your information, they gather it. They don't even tell you half the time that they're gathering your information and selling it right and left and everything. And do we have the framework? Is our framework set up to address this? Something I found really fascinating a few years ago, well, not even a few years ago, a year ago, maybe two, is this whole, and it was all over Congress, aliens, well, are
Like extraterrestrials?
extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
And they have all these committees and they're looking into all of this. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating, all this kind of stuff. And you just think, okay, so if we have aliens, then let's just work under the assumption we
Yeah.
do. Not saying we do, but we'll just work under that assumption. Okay, how do we deal with that? And if they land on the United States, okay, but what if they land in Europe?
Yeah.
Yeah, do we have any right to say what they can and can't do in our world? We don't have a world government. And I'm like, all these things, I'm just like, my mind just was racing, like,
I want to be part of your Sunday night club. This sounds awesome.
well, it's interesting. I mean, there's no doubt we're center right, but I think it's a very open-minded group of people.
Right.
One of the people in the group just literally right before I got on here emailed me and said, "Oh, did you see, that there's a thing out there about, Trump bringing in the troops into Chicago or whatever, and all the constitutional, I don't care. I don't want to debate whether that's the right or the wrong thing to do, but it's not the Constitution is clear that law enforcement's up to the state, but
Hmm.
yet in certain circumstances, the feds can step in. Do we fit into that? I mean, I like those kind of discussions. I like those kind of debates, not because I really always care about the end result, but because I find it fascinating what other people think, what they believe, and why they believe the way they do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, when you think about uh, the framers of the Constitution,
Hmm.
one of the reasons that we have three branches of government is because they needed the checks and balances because they didn't trust the government that they had just, declared independence from,
Hmm.
and they didn't trust each other.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
They didn't want, like, it wasn't just that we don't want a king. It's we don't want any of the rest of us to have any more power. Like they
I know.
understood that piece, and I think that is like enormously fascinating about and then also like that most of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence uh, paid for it dearly. Like these were
Yeah.
not enormously successful people after they did that. They had all kinds of issues that we seem to forget, as if
Yeah.
these men, just human men, being human,
Hmm.
doing great and terrible things, having an impact on history that they wouldn't necessarily have had the foresight to. I think the best thing that they knew at the time was that they didn't know what was going to happen. And they had to build it. Like, if they had wanted the Constitution just to say the way the Constitution was, they wouldn't have had a
Amendment process.
vehicle for amendments. Yeah.
Yeah. And now, to be fair, only one amendment has ever been implemented and then retracted, which was
Prohibition, right?
prohibition.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got sedition in my head, and I was like, it's not sedition. I think there's a
That's
sedition.
different.
That's a big difference. But I found that, interesting. And like I said, all these things fascinate me on more of a level of I'm interested in all the different debate and the different discussions. But what I have found is there are certain people that I can engage in these kind of conversations with that disagree with me.
Hmm.
And I truly do. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you think and feel because to
Right.
me that informs my if I'm going to I don't like to armchair quarterback. So if I'm going to sit and complain about something, I want to at least come up with something that is a
Mm.
solution.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to be the right solution, but I'm not naive enough to think I am naive, whatever, enough to think that I know enough to think through the consequences of if we were to do X, what
Yeah.
would the outcome of that be? And I think it was really what it was frustrating to me, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, you write these 4,000, 3,000 page laws and you pass them, but nobody thinks about, I mean, in all those thousands of pages, you didn't think through what's going to happen,
Hmm.
what the end result is going to be, or not the end result, but
Right.
what could happen. Because to
What's
me,
the nuance?
yeah, it
We
sounds,
we made buttons one year that said "I heart nuance."
yeah.
Hmm.
And it's like, so you have, and that's what politicians are paid to do, and they're really good at it, is coming up with sound bites. So now we have sound bites of these 4,000 page documents,
Right.
and it's all condensed down into sound bites. And I'm like, I don't want sound bites. So although, going back to you talk about journalists and,
Hmm.
the credentialed kind that actually went to school and learned how to
Hmm.
do this and all that, and I totally respect that. I like the podcast world because you can get into 2, 3 hour conversations about things. And then you can discuss all of these details.
Right.
Um, and so, I think we need some of both. I don't think we need to get rid of journalism, and I don't think we need to get rid of podcasts. I think there's a space for both of them. And I think it allows us to have more better informed information.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you're talking like, the the podcast is really more for an exchange of ideas and a little more in-depth kind of conversation, I think.
Kind of like you and I are having
Yeah.
right.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then you can go off on a tangent and you can, find the thing on page 482 that you really care about. You don't care about what's on 400 page 483, but
No.
482, like that's your thing.
Yes.
And that is a challenge to those 4,000 page bills. Sometimes they need to be that long, and sometimes like the omnibus. So in Minnesota, where I live, we our state government is having a love affair with omnibus bills. And if there is ever a hill I'm going to die on, it's going to be omnibus bills
Yeah.
because
Thank you.
beyond being, I mean, like in fairness, it is a really it's a really efficient way to get stuff done. But in my mind, it's also a really good way to heighten our divisions
Hmm.
and have everybody be in this camp or that camp. There's not a lot of room for, okay, well, you and I are going to be on the same side of this bill issue and opposite sides of that one. Um, when you lump them all together, it's pretty much always, this side, and that is it. And I don't know. I think that does damaging things to the relationships between lawmakers, and I think it also does damaging things to the idea, the way that we as citizens view politics and view government. I think we need more of those little disagreements, which we need. I mean, we need more disagreements in general.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'm totally on board with you. I know that there's been a push, well, a vocal push, not a legitimate push in my opinion, to have you know,
Hmm.
single bill, single
Single subject bills, yes.
single subject, single talk. Told you my words this late in the day.
I was having that day a couple of days ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, can I please start over?
And I totally agree with that. And I think, from a voter's perspective, then I know my representative voted on this bill this way. I can't say my representative voted on this bill because he voted for, or he, she,
Yes.
whatever, voted for so many different things in that bill. They might have been on board with this, but then we all love pork, and pork's been around forever too. Don't
Oh yeah.
let's not pretend it didn't
Hmm.
always exist. So they gave you all these little kickbacks in order to get your vote over here, and then you probably would have voted against this over here, but you voted for this over here. So I don't really know where you stand.
Hmm.
How do I
Absolutely.
how do I know if you're representing me?
Exactly. Yes. Amen.
Yeah, that and campaign finance reform. That's another one of my things. I wish, but then I look back and I say, okay, my mom was a very, very smart person. And conceptually, I like the idea of term limits.
Hmm.
But my mom, when I was younger, I've always been weird. I've been a political junkie since I was in, I'm not joking. I was 10 years old and I wanted to vote for Richard Nixon.
Okay. Yes.
Why? I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Because
First,
you're 10.
well, first of all,
Yeah.
they never talked about it at school. I was only in fifth grade,
Hmm.
and my family is not political. So it wasn't like I was hearing these conversations. I lived in Alaska.
Interesting. Okay. All
Like,
right.
I have no idea, but I did. So like I said, I've always been kind of weird. And, every once in a while I'd ask my mom these political questions, and I was like, I think we need term limits. And she's like, why? And I said, well, because they get in there too long and, all the usual arguments. I'm like 10.
Hmm.
And she's like, you already have the ability to term limit them.
Yep. It's your vote.
I know. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, you're right. And ever since then, whenever I hear term limits, conceptually, I like the idea, but then I have to remind myself I have the power right now to term limit them.
Hmm.
But in a practical sense, does it really work that way? I don't know. Because people we like, even though we may complain, and this is, statistics bear this out like crazy. We may not like our representatives, but we keep voting for them
Right. Yeah.
over and over.
Incumbents get reelected. I think that that comes from the very human, and so much of this work I do comes down to like physiology and
Mhm,
psychology and, just human beings being human beings. We will defer to the devil we know
mhm,
9 times out of 10.
mhm.
Most people will defer to the devil they know, even though it's like, well, I don't like this person, but I really don't like that, or I don't know about that, so I'm not going to line up behind that because that could be worse.
Yeah. And if you
Hmm.
look at, the congressional approval ratings are like in the tank, they have been forever.
Right.
But yet the same people keep going back there every year after year. And that's what also think about campaign finance reform. In the back of my mind, I think we already have laws on the books.
Hmm.
Why do we need to pass more laws? Why can't we just
That's a
enforce the
really
laws we have?
interesting question. And for me, um, the scary part of money in politics for me is not the money that goes to candidates. So because the money that goes to the campaign apparatus, it pays for staff, it pays for literature, it pays for lawn signs, it pays for, travel,
Mhm,
it pays for like all those basic things.
mhm.
The scary part of money in politics to me is all of the money that is swirling around organizations that are designed to divide us. So, like,
Super
you
PAC.
probably remember when, it used to, like, even 15, 20 years ago,
Mhm.
the DCCC and the RNCC were those were not organizations that like were fully staffed 24/7.
Right.
It would be that people they would fully staff up for, 7, 8, 9 months in a year in that 2-year campaign cycle. They get people elected, and then most of the people who would work there would go back to their other job that,
Mhm.
teaching or working at a law firm or a marketing firm or, lobbying or, whatever. Uh, Now, those organizations are almost fully staffed all the time, or their, slow time staff is equivalent of what it used to be like when it was busy. And in order to keep those organizations functioning at the level that they think they need to function all the time, they have to fundraise all the time. And to fundraise all the time, we and I did some campaign fundraising for a while. Um, that industry, that business model has been to lean into fear and anger.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you probably get all the emails. I get a lot of the
Yeah, of
emails.
course.
It's fear, anger, and a sense of urgency.
Mhm.
And again, psychology and human physiology, like those are the ways that we are motivated. Happy people are enormously hard to motivate
Yes.
to give to the candidate or to, show up for a thing or to vote or all these things. So when we have all of these organizations that are designed to divide us, and in order to be relevant and to keep their sort of engines moving, they have to keep us all sort of in this well, I call it campaign and campaign industrial complex.
Yes.
I think that's what we're in now.
Yeah.
Um, so like that's the scary part of money in politics to me.
Yeah.
It's we're driving the engine of division, and division is enormously well funded in this country.
Yes. And I think super PACs, you know, I really struggle with super PACs. I, I'm not sure, that you can say you can't, from a constitutional perspective, say you can't have a super PAC.
Hmm.
I know that there's a lot of laws supposedly, that they can't coordinate with the campaigns and different things, but nowadays all you have to do is go on TV and spew your message and the campaign will hear it and they'll, they'll pick it up. And so one of the things when I was looking at your website that I really liked, and I wish more organizations would sprout up that would are, and I'm full disclosure, I was an instructional designer and in the business of education for 30 years.
There
So,
you go.
so I'm very pro education. And I don't mean formal education. I We need to educate people because even though we know that this email we got that said urgent,
Yes.
we're going to be running in the next 4 years, but it's urgent. If you don't contribute to us right away, something terrible is going to happen, right? And we go, oh my goodness. I'm just like, oh my gosh, delete, delete, delete,
Yes.
report junk. But most people don't. And, if we could educate people that this is how this is why we're so divided.
Yeah.
This little text or email that you responded to and that you contributed to is feeding that division. It's
Hmm.
feeding that problem. And that's not to say you shouldn't contribute to a campaign. That's not to say you
Right.
should
Absolutely.
support your favorite candidate, whatever. Um, but understand that understand that the overwhelming majority of the information that you get at the top level, no matter which news organization or your favorite podcast or whatever, when you're at the very top level, you're kind of getting propaganda. And they're meant that propaganda. I mean, I put out some little educational videos on the Constitution that get very few clicks on YouTube. Yes, I use AI and I say, write me this compelling headline or whatever. But if you want people to click on your little informational, my 5-minute video on Jefferson and Madison and their discussion over the, the
Hmm.
Constitution, that kind of thing, you have to come up with something that's controversial, that I hate to say it, but hate
Right.
pays. And so if you want clicks on YouTube, if you want to educate people with this little video, you have to come up with something very controversial. And if we understood that, I mean, to me, if I saw something that said, oh, Madison and Jefferson disagree on, how long the Constitution should last, I'd be like, oh, that's very interesting to me. But I'm probably the only person who's going to click on it, right?
See, I know plenty of people who are your flavor of nerd, and I say that with I am also your
Yes.
flavor of nerd. So like, yes. Yeah, I think that yeah, and there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of quote unquote content being created just for the
Mhm.
just out of like, oh, let's create content. And it's not necessarily educational, it's not necessarily helpful to the world. And that's what social media and YouTube and all of these things has that we've given everybody a microphone. And um the gatekeeping on that, that's a really difficult question is, how do we sort of flesh out what information comes to the top or not? And to your point, when we understand the human physiology of our brains and that you've got to have something urgent or controversial or sexy to get people to click on stuff when we have so many options, that's what's going to happen. The one of the things that I like the best about the work I've done for several years in this space, is that uh, it makes me feel really good about division in that human beings do it naturally. Like this is just a thing that we do as part of our evolution of human beings
Mhm,
is we form in groups and out groups.
mhm,
We try to find the people who are our own flavor of nerd
mhm,
and we group with them and then we look at people who are the different flavor of nerd and those people are different. And in our evolution in the very oldest part of our brain, different at some point in our history, different meant dangerous.
mhm.
And so we do this very naturally. We find the in groups and the out groups, and we self segregate and we do all those things. So sometimes we have to sort of deliberately not do that.
Yeah.
And that's what I find so interesting about, like, I'm circling back about the internet and about how um, you can find your own TV channel of content. Um, and when the algorithms are just delivering more and more of what we like, then that I think is where we get into those silos and we don't necessarily hear the breadth and depth of information. And that's how our education gets narrowed a little bit, I think.
I totally, yeah. And I feel like, we all live in these echo chambers. We all
Hmm.
do. Because I I intentionally, and I mean I have to, it's a very conscious thing. When I hear something that makes me feel uncomfortable, that makes
Mm.
me disagree, and my first inclination is that's not right. Move on to the next thing. I have to stop myself, and I do it intentionally. I stop myself and I say no, even if I don't like it, even if I disagree with it, even if the information is incorrect.
Mm.
I need to listen to it because otherwise I'm just living in this echo chamber. And
Right.
the more we live in these echo chambers, the more divided we become.
Absolutely. Because you just get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, well, everything I believe is reflected back at me. So everybody must believe this, and this must be 100% right.
Yeah, and
Because nobody's saying anything different.
how can those other people that don't believe what I believe, aren't they getting all this same information I
Right.
am?
No,
No.
no, they are not. Which is like that's fascinating. Like sometimes I will talk to people, um, and and I wonder, like, they sometimes they talk about stuff, and I'm just like, where are you getting that information? I mean, like Facebook, okay. Like what I would really love to see what is the what is the algorithm delivering to you that it's not delivering to me because this is interesting. It may not be correct, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And so now I'm going to somewhat switch gears and go back to my
Cool.
my instructional design career.
Yeah.
It was about 2010, 2011. I worked in corporate America, not in the, K through 12 or
Hmm.
academic space. And this is when the millennials were first coming into the workforce and there was all these generational differences. And so I was having to write a lot of onboarding courses for, how to have baby boomers talk to millennials.
Right.
And it was fun, it was interesting.
And of
But
course you left the Xers out.
well, of course, they get left out of everything. It's
I get
funny
left
because
out.
I'm like right on the cusp of being a baby boomer, and
Okay.
this will
Yeah.
tell you a lot about me too. I'm married to an Xer.
Okay. Cool.
And he's right on the cusp, so I'm under on one anyway. That
There you
aside,
go.
there's still a pretty significant age gap there. And even yesterday, coming home from church, I was like, "So you're not a millennial and you're not a baby boomer. What are you?" And he goes, "I." He goes, "I'm one of those Generation X," and I was like, "Oh, that's right. There is such a thing." Anyway,
Yes. We are the middle child of
yeah,
generations.
you are. Which I'm a
Yes.
middle child in my birth order, and I love middle
Oh.
children. I think they're wonderful. So maybe that's where we need to look is to Generation X to solve all of our problems.
We're feral.
Yeah, exactly. So
Hmm.
anyway, I was as
So you're
all
teaching boomers how to talk to Gen Xers or
or
to
millennial,
millennials. Yes.
right. But in that process, I'm noticing that these millennials, and I'm not trying to criticize millennials,
Yep.
they get plenty of criticism without me doing that. But these people that are coming into the workforce,
Hmm.
and I was noticing that many people coming into the workforce were lacking five critical knowledge, skills, attributes that what we called KSAs to be successful in the workforce. And they were critical thinking, team building, communication, resilience, and problem solving. And what was interesting was this was just my own observation. I didn't have any data to back this up, but because I'm an independent consultant and I've worked with at least 100 or more organizations, it seemed to be across the board that I was encountering this. So I just in the back of my mind said, okay, I'm going to adjust my building my learning programs, keeping those kind of things in mind. Well, it wasn't
Hmm.
too long after that. ATD, the Association of Talent Development,
Yeah.
biggest membership organization out there for that learning and development, came out with a study that showed exactly that. Like the exact same five
How
things.
gratifying for you.
I know.
You're
I
like,
was
I
like,
already said this.
I know. And I've been saying this, right? And so then once I was validated, I was like, okay, let me think. And so, being the history person that I am, I went back and I was like, okay, it seems to have been the Industrial Revolution. Since we started the Industrial Revolution and we went into this mass production assembly line type
Mhm.
work environment. And that that doesn't require critical thinking, problem solving,
Mm,
communication, team building. You show up, widget, widget,
yep.
widget, widget. Um, so schools adapted to that environment and said, we
Mm,
don't need, and schools became assembly line.
right.
And so, and it became, we're teaching to the test. Everything
Hmm.
was about the test, passing the test.
Hmm.
And so we got away from those things in our academic, curriculums, and we weren't teaching that anymore. And when you got out in the workforce, we weren't living it anymore. So then, as we moved into this knowledge and information phase, all of a sudden we need these skills that were gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now think about it. Think about critical thinking, problem solving, especially those two at the top,
Hmm.
communication,
Hmm.
yes, team building, yes, and resilience, especially. None of those things make you feel good when you're engaging in on that level. Do you know what I mean?
Mm, true. Yes, because you're faced with like if you have to deal with any of those, you're faced with some kind of conflict or some kind of challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
So there's something going on there. So we've got this industrial revolution that's creating this problem, which has then fed into the whole academic world, feeding into this problem. And now we need these skills back, and we're living in an information age where we're starting to live in these echo chambers. Nobody wants to think critically about things. They
Mm,
don't want to problem solve. We all want to sit around and complain about everything we don't like and complain and say it's the other side's fault that, we're experiencing
right.
this. We don't want to work as teams because we don't like the other side. And that would require communication. And we don't want to communicate with the other side because they're all wrong. And
Uh-huh.
resilience is totally thrown out the window, right?
That yes, that sounds like my day-to-day challenge. Yes.
Exactly. So there's really not a lot in this world that we deal with that teaches us these are important things, really
Hmm.
super important things. And we have to engage with them if we're going to evolve in a healthy way moving forward. Because
Right.
otherwise, AI is going to take us over. All of
Hmm.
these other things are just going to overtake us, and we're not going to be able to, because we won't know how to solve the problems that AI presents enormous opportunities, but the challenges are
And
so significant.
hmm.
We need people who can think critically, who can solve problems and recognize and I look at politics the same way. there's enormous opportunity there. And we're missing it because we're living in these silos and we're not thinking critically and we're not solving problems.
Yeah. Yeah. The the grouping that we do as humans, the us and them, has taken on like a physical uh, manifestation of that, in that we now self-segregate where we live,
Hmm.
not necessarily based on socioeconomic status or race or anything, but just by ideology. And so grouping like that makes for some really harmonious neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Or you have like all the people on one side,
Hmm.
sort of one side of the ideological spectrum, who then start to fight with each other, because they have factions within that, which is something I've watched happen a little bit. Um, so so I think uh, the part of kind of getting out of that, and to your point about like looking at things that give you an icky feeling and then leaning into that instead of leaning out, like that's enormously important for, not only just relating to each other as human beings, but also just like dealing with all of our challenges, because nobody has all the answers.
No. And I don't think, okay, I've said this way too many times, but looking back through history, history repeats itself.
Right?
But I think we're actually moving into an era where we don't have any historical precedent to look back to.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, there's certain aspects of history we can look back to and say, yeah,
Right.
but we have never been on the precipice of such a significant evolution in such a short period of time with such powerful tools.
Yeah, it's like the Industrial Revolution, but
On
amplified.
steroids. Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And then there's all the ethical questions and the
yes.
moral questions, and you kind of need to know all the information so that you know when AI is hallucinating. Like that's my favorite thing about it, is that it sometimes lies to you and it
I
doesn't
know.
know it's lying.
I know. And it's always fun to point it out to it when it lies. And
Right.
okay, segregating this out a little bit, what we're looking at right now, what we engage with is not AI. It's really these large language models, right?
Mm,
And they are intelligent. So they are a form of artificial intelligence. But we're right on the cusp of this AGI, which is, true,
right.
you know,
Generative.
yeah. And that we can't we can't even begin to comprehend. Like today, it was funny. I was just talking to my husband about cults. What defines a cult? And how, because all these words that people throw out nowadays, and I'm always interested, like, so my husband, I was asking him, and he's like, "Ah, just go ask Chat GPT." I'm like,
Right.
I don't want Chat GPT's opinion, right?
Right.
So I
You need
asked him.
Merriam-Webber's opinion.
And so, and I mean, that's very, and it's interesting because I did look up three different dictionaries, and each of them had a slightly nuanced version of what a cult is, right?
Ooh, cool.
Yeah. And I was like, so then I, thought of some organizations that I think might, qualify as that. And I absolutely refuse to call anybody or anybody's organization a cult unless I have 100% hands down proof that they're a cult, because I think it's a very derogatory way to refer to people or to the
Okay.
organization. So I won't
Mhm.
say who I was looking up. And and they were three different organizations, and each of them had their own unique characteristics. And ChatGPT was confused.
Ah.
They're like, well, yeah, but this one does this and this one does that. I said, yeah, but they don't all do all of the, all of the above and kind of thing. And I was just kind of, I found, it's fun to have.
Just challenging the
Yeah,
chat GPT.
yeah,
Awesome.
it's
Somebody
fun.
needs to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what my husband always tells me to do. He says, just talk to it like, you do me, only don't argue with it. Um,
No, it needs somebody to argue with it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, because I
Yeah.
get emotionally involved in arguments. So just stay calm.
Well, in that case, which is healthier, being emotionally involved with the in a dispute with the
Yeah,
Chat
ChatGPT.
GPT or
Yes,
with your husband? Like,
yes,
how many marriages could be saved
I
by
know.
which, like I will say, like, my parents are sort of to blame for the work that I do because, or to give credit or blame,
Yes.
whichever. Um, because my dad has been a Republican for a very long time. He's what I call a legacy Republican.
Okay.
And my mom is a Democrat
Hey.
or a libertarian,
Mm,
depending on the day and the issue.
okay.
She's from rural Kansas, and all of the Kansans, no matter what size, what space you are in the
Mm,
ideological spectrum, they all have sort of a libertarian lean to them.
yeah.
Yeah,
In
which
New
is
Hampshire.
which is good. Yeah, there you go. So I think the interesting thing about when you have the ability to sort of debate,
Hmm.
if relationships aren't strong enough to withstand that debate, that actually could be a thing that ChatGPT or any of the other AI models could actually form a really important function, to your point about education,
Hmm.
in letting people have those debates in a way that's safe and isn't going to damage the relationship.
Yes. And I think you're absolutely right. And it's unfortunate that people are using, these large language models to engage with on a romantic level. I'm like, not sure that's a good idea. I mean, but hey, to each their own. But I do think you're right. I do think having these kind of conversations, but we need to teach people that you
Yes,
should be doing this and you
right.
should be challenging it. Like I really, organizations that I felt like, in my opinion, would have qualified as being a cult. I biased the conversation with, I think they're a cult. What do you think? And
Hmm.
ChatGPT came back and said, you're right, they're a cult. Here's X, Y, and Z. And I said, okay, but then as I started
Yeah,
getting
what
other,
about this? Yeah, the nuance.
yeah. And ChatGPT, I will admit, it just kept regurgitating back to me what I was telling it,
Mm.
but it did bring out a lot of facts that I hadn't thought about.
Well, see, there you go.
Yeah. And so I can't say that that conversation wasn't as helpful as I would have liked it to have been, but it did bring out some information, like when, because rarely do you see cults anymore where, like Jim Jones and when they drank the Kool-Aid down in
Right.
South America, that that qualifies as a cult, okay?
Yes. Yes.
And they're
That's
all,
kind of our stereotypical
yeah,
definition of a cult.
right, exactly.
Man.
But you just don't see that hardly anymore. So,
Which is, I think, a good thing,
yeah,
right?
oh yeah, yeah, totally a good thing. But, there were some organizations that use the law to sue other organizations that don't agree with them. And because they have lots of money, they're able to do that. And they bring in a lot of information that may or may not be, completely accurate. And so to me, that was kind of that, okay, that's interesting. I don't like people using their power. I don't like the government using their power to, lawfare. And I certainly don't like large organizations using their money and power to engage in lawfare. So why would I want any organization to use their, to engage in lawfare? And if it's a legitimate lawsuit,
Hmm.
yes. But I've been involved, unfortunately enough, in the legal world because my husband, he's not a lawyer, he's a cyber security guy, but he works for one of the biggest law firms out there. So I'm very familiar with the whole legal
Uh-huh.
world. And I have learned that unfortunately the world once again that we live in is the more money and the more influence you have, the more likely you're going to get the outcome that you want in court, which is very unfortunate because we all
Mm.
we all look to the court to be a fair arbiter, and they really aren't. Um, unless
Well,
you're,
does the money and the resources, um, does I wonder if that doesn't as much, sway the outcome as sway like your approach to it. Like, if you have resources to know how to bring a lawsuit that you're going to win, or like here's the argument that's not going to work with the court, then you just don't bring that lawsuit. So their higher than average success rate might have to do with knowing how the system works. Um,
It
and
does.
that thing. And I will say, like our legal system, we're having a stress test right now,
Yes.
which is not a terrible thing to go through a
No,
stress test every once in a while.
no. And I'm not saying that, 100% across the board this is true because it's not. But there, and I'll give you just this is a personal example from my own life. And it's anecdotal, but
Cool.
I'll tell you why I think so many of the things that I experienced in this particular lawsuit demonstrates what I'm saying.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm my first husband was blind.
Okay.
Okay. And he was working at an elementary school. And all these misconceptions about being blind, get them out of your head. They He didn't fit into any stereotypical category of being blind. So he worked in this elementary school as an aide in their special education department, specifically helping this one young man who had a lot of behavioral challenges.
Okay.
And then this young man was now going to move up to middle school.
Hmm.
And his parents specifically asked for my husband to move up with him.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the school wouldn't even grant my husband, my ex-husband, he's since passed away, um, an interview because he was blind. He's been working in this same capacity for 2 years with this same student. You have somebody, and you've got parents who are requesting that my husband move into this position, right? Up with him into middle school. So they just refused. Absolutely not. And you can imagine, even under the best of circumstances, get a blind person getting a job is difficult to do. So we were talking to a lawyer, and the lawyer's like, "Oh, this is a clear-cut case." Because they put it in writing. They said the reason he wasn't even getting an interview was because he was blind. And that's totally against the ADA, 100%
Right.
against the ADA. But we're just little nobodies, right? Okay. And so we're suing the school district. Okay. And the school district obviously has a lot more money than we do. And our lawyer put together our case, and we went down to Cheyenne. We were living in Wyoming at the time, and we were living on the other side of the state. Went down to Cheyenne for our court date, and we were sitting. It was going to just be in judge's chambers. It wasn't going to be in the courtroom, right? And it was just a hearing for summary judgment.
Okay.
So we're sitting out in the waiting room of the judge's chambers, and the lawyers for the school district came and sat down by us. We're like, whatever. And then here comes the judge into the waiting room of his chambers. And the lawyer for the school district gets up. They start talking, chatting away about their last golf game, their last this, their that, kind of thing. And we were we were all kind of like, okay, these guys are a little bit too cozy for comfort. But we thought, hey,
Hmm.
the legal, it's a small community. They must all know
Right.
each other.
Yeah.
We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We went in there. We were not in the judge's chambers less than 5 minutes. We we made our 5 minute argument why we should, whatever, be able to proceed. We weren't asking to win the case there. All it was get past summary judgment and proceed to a real, you know,
The trial.
trial. And the judge didn't even ask the school district to present any arguments. He just said, nope, case dismissed. And we were like, okay, this is weird. So our lawyer was like, okay, let's take this and appeal it. And, just out of curiosity, I started looking at the judges, on the appellate court, and they were all really in tight because, sorry, in Wyoming and stuff, everybody knows everybody, right? So,
Right.
we all
There are
knew
more cows than people in Wyoming.
exactly.
Yes.
And so, you know, th- plenty of people told me that the judge for the school district was in tight with the people on the appellate court, right? Even though it says in the ADA, you cannot discriminate. My husband couldn't even get an interview, and they put in writing that it was because he was blind.
And what would it, being blind, what sort of hardship would that have in their argument? What would that have brought upon the student or the school or whatever, or your
Well,
husband?
I'm just assuming because they never told us. That's all they said is you're blind, we can't interview you. And it's like, but I was blind 2 years ago when you interviewed me and hired me. And I've worked for 2 years in this capacity. My suspicion is that the insurance for legal
Hmm.
reasons, if something were to happen to this student, you know, they,
Right.
I'm guessing that's would have been their logic and their argument had we have gone to trial. So that was just one of several different, situations where I've been involved. And it's going to make it sound like I spend a lot of time in the legal system, which I don't, but I'm also very fascinated by the legal system. So I follow a lot of court cases.
Hmm.
And whenever a Supreme Court decision comes out, I don't read any headlines, nothing. I go and get the actual decision and I'm weird, I read it.
Nice.
Yeah, because that to me, I'm going to the exact source. And
Absolutely.
I do that with other cases too. And as I've read through, my daughter, got divorced and her husband was trying to take custody away from her, even though she was not a drug addict. There was no reason for them to be fighting for full custody and to take custody away from my daughter. And I was talking to my husband's boss, who is a partner at this law firm, and we were just kind of joking that um, his his mother was paying for their lawyer, and she has buku bucks. And my daughter didn't have a lot of money, and I'm sure that's why they thought they could win this case. And so he was giving me all of the ways to beat influence and beat money when it comes to the
Hmm.
legal system because he admits, I mean, he's a partner for this law firm. He admits that yes, the legal system is fraught with that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And so, when people say, oh, well, they went to court and they won, I'm like, so what? I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me. All that means is you got to judge that that's my own bias. And I have to remind
Hmm.
myself that's my bias is that they the system favors they like prosecutors over defense attorneys, almost hands down. That's why prosecutors almost always win their cases,
Hmm.
and defense attorneys rarely win their cases. Um,
Well, and prosecutors get to choose which cases they
yes,
bring. Like
ex-
plenty of cases don't ever go to trial because the prosecutor is like, well, I don't have the evidence to get a conviction on this, so I'm just not even going to charge it.
right, exactly.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of things that go into it. But that's what I'm saying is I think, I don't even know where I started down this road. Yeah, the whole legal system, and I feel like once again, we've got to get people to look beyond um, the, oh, they won in court, so whoever won in court is right and whoever lost is wrong, because that's not always the case. And oftentimes, like I said, and it's really fascinating to me when I read Supreme Court cases because I love to read the dissents, no matter,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
whoever
Well, and
won.
that the dissents are a really good example of that, a lot of these cases come down to nuance. They come down to degrees of things, and who prevails. To your point, who prevails doesn't necessarily mean they're 100% right or 100% wrong. It may have to do with how they align with the law or the interpretation or all of those things. But that is the system that we have.
Yes,
And like part of the stress test is reminding people how important it is to serve on juries. Like when you get your jury summit, you got to go serve on the jury. I am a person who I will never get seated on a jury, which is unfortunate because I'd love to be on one.
I know.
Um,
Me too.
but my dad was in law enforcement for 37 years.
Oh,
And so there's not a defense attorney in the country that will put me on a jury, which is
I know.
disappointing. But and I know like too many people. So yeah.
My mom,
But like I would love that.
I know.
I would also probably be the person that would be very disruptive because I'd be like, "Well, what about this?"
I know. They'd kick me out of the jury room. I would be like, my mom served on two different juries, and she said, you can't believe, you absolutely cannot believe how complex.
Yeah.
It's not easy. She said,
Super, right? It's
yeah,
it's that embrace of the nuance and the situation and all the thing. Yeah, like that's my flavor nerd right there
yeah,
is being on a jury that I probably never get to be on. But
yeah, me too.
yeah.
Well, and I won't because I know how to answer the questions, and I probably wouldn't, I can't say I wouldn't answer them honestly, but I would probably bias my answer so I could get on the jury, which wouldn't be a good
That's
thing.
okay. Plenty of people bias their answer so they don't get on the jury.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's not fair because I wouldn't want to. That's not the way the system is set up. I want this. And I had another friend who was a lawyer, a lobbyist slash lawyer, known way too many lawyers in my life too. But he said, and I to me this was, and I think this is the most fair assessment of the legal system. He said the legal system isn't about justice. It's about finding resolution. And he said,
Hmm. Interesting.
and I have found that to be so true, and especially in my daughter's case because she did win.
Hmm.
But I found the judge really, really biased toward my daughter's ex-husband. I mean, I can't even tell you all the shenanigans they pulled and got away with.
But
But
she won anyway.
she won anyway. And it's because you could tell the baby or the baby, the judge was trying to split the baby in half.
Mm.
And he was trying to find a resolution where, hey, you as a dad still get to see your child. No, you can't take him away 100% from somebody who, you know, has no criminal history, no use of drugs or alcohol, or has any, she's never been a bad mother, been accused of being a bad mother, or, you know,
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that's fascinating is that it's always changing. So we'll see. Maybe 6 months from now, the legal system will look slightly different, and maybe a year from now, it'll look slightly different from before.
yeah. And I think, in summary, in our here is, I think the same thing about the legal system as I do about the political system right now. I think they're both, like you said, being
Hmm.
stress tested, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the best thing that can come out of all of this is I think the other thing that's coming out of it indirectly is people are getting an education.
Yes. Yes. Civic education should not just stop after junior year of high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And best way to get it is experientially, and we're getting experience in it every day. So I think that's wonderful.
Yes, we are. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so much fun.
yeah. So share whatever social media, whatever contact information you want, and
Okay,
I'll put it in the show
so
notes.
our website is majoritymiddle.org. Not in the middle, but majoritymiddle.org. And that's our handle for most of the socials anyway. Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you've been enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating to help others discover this valuable content. Your support is greatly appreciated and helps us continue creating engaging episodes for our listeners.